Right, guys, an update on transforming application to use signals. Here I'll speak about several patterns. Of course, they'll evolve as the Angular team is currently undergoing the process of streamlining the usage of signals. The first pattern is this. Right now we are in the user service, and let's say if you would like to get a certain user, we need to pass the user ID. The point is that with signals, we can just set this user ID from our component. So in the calling component, we can have a setter that is calling the service to set the ID, which is passed to our router. So whenever the ID changes, we will be setting this ID inside of the service. If we go to this method, we'll see that just user ID is by default 1, and if we change the user ID, it will change to whatever we pass to it. And so once we have the user ID set as a signal, we are basically here in the get user, we are monitoring this signal. Since it's a signal, we need to convert it to observable, and this we will do with this conversion function to observable. And we can pipe information towards it. So the moment user ID changes, we would like to make a get request. And the next thing we would like to do is we would like to propagate the error and the data from the performance of this observable here, giving us an user response. When we get a correct result, we create an object with the following values. Like for the value, we grab the data directly from the HTTP response, and we give an error of undefined. And the opposite happens if there is an error in the HTTP request. So we create an observable with the following object, where the value this time is undefined, and the error is pointing to the error that the HTTP client is giving us. So this is a pattern that here repeats all the time because it's suitable for us to grab the errors and the data also. Now when we need to use those inside of our component, for example, for getting data, we just create one variable data signal and we point it to our observable. And just because we would like to start this observable, we use the function toSignal. Keep in mind that toSignal we are not using inside of the service because it will automatically subscribe when we run this function to the observable, but we're using it inside of the consuming component. And then in order to grab the real data and the error from it, we have those two lines which are computed properties. So whenever this observable is subscribed to via our signal and returns something, we will be able to grab its value and to save it in the get data. And if there is an error, it will be saved in the get error message. And now those two get data and get error message, we can use them in our component. So for example, if we are adding data, we're using those two ifs here. So if there is an error, we show it to the user, and if the request has performed successfully, we also show it to the user. Keep in mind that in order to use the signal, we need to unpack it, so we run those parentheses. Another use case of signals is when we are working with forms. Here the forms are template driven. If we would like to have access, for example, to this field a name, we can have a template variable pointed to the ng model, and then in the code we'll be able to access it just referencing the name. And the next important thing is this binding that happens here. So we would like to autofill the data in our form. That's why we use this big expression, and form value is one signal that we have created, and then we would like to see whether we have certain properties inside of this signal. If we go to the signal, we see that it's attached to this signal here, get data signal, which was attached to our observable, and this automatically, by using toSignal, will transfer the data from the HTTP request directly to our signal, and it will go to our form value. Afterwards, we can access .value, and it will give us an access to the user interface. Okay, so if we go to the observable, we see that the value of the observable is of type user or interface user. And let's check what's inside of this interface. So we have ID, name, email, and password. That's why we can access them directly here after the value and then the dot. And the question marks, of course, are just because those values can be undefined by the time the template is rendered. And the last thing I would like to mention is that when we're having code that we will need to update or add new data, actually we can subscribe to the observables provided by our service. And inside of the subscription, we have next and error properties that actually are for when the observable completes successfully and when there is an error. So we have here one signal that, if you remember, was feeding those computed values. Update data, let's say an update error message. We are just here setting the signal, passing it the information coming directly from the subscription. So in overall, that's how you can handle forms and switch to signal-based components. And let's hope that in the future we'll have simpler ways of doing those operations.